Well, welcome to Tim's Take. This is our first ever podcast. Our first guest will be Dr. Eric Bailey. Eric, tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get here to Missouri?
Hi, Tim. I've been here for about 5 years now. So I originally hail from eastern New Mexico. I grew up on a cow-calf and stocker operation about 100 miles east of Albuquerque. So, ranching cattle has been in my blood, and I was previously a professor at West Texas A&M University in Canyon, and 5 years ago, Mizzou came calling, and I moved up to Missouri and learned about all kinds of new colors of green that I didn't get to experience in New Mexico. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me as the first guest.
Oh, you're very welcome. And we have a very hot topic today because of our weather extremes this summer. Our cattle producers may be in a bit of a predicament right now.
So it's not just the weather this spring or this summer. We've had troubles going all the way back to fertilizer prices going crazy in the winter when the Ukraine conflict first kicked off. We saw nitrogen fertilizer get to be over $1 per pound of nitrogen, and that put a lot of producers in a predicament of asking whether they were going to afford that nitrogen fertilizer on their hay fields and on their pastures this spring. Nitrogen is an important component of our tall fescue-based forage system. Folks reduced their nitrogen or they completely omitted it, and I talked to a lot of folks across the state, and yields in pastures and hay fields were down by 30-40% this year, and a lot of that was due to the fact that people didn't fertilize. We had a normal spring in terms of moisture, but I would say at least in a lot of the state, we got to the first of June and the spigot just turned off. There are a lot of people that got real dry from there. So,
well, and the lack of nitrogen fertilizer also reduced the quality, the protein quality.
Absolutely, yeah. So we saw from a crude protein standpoint, there was definitely less nutritive value to that forage for sure. Now, don't get me wrong, drought has been around. We saw particularly in the early part of the summer, the southern half of the state was in tough shape. That drought has somewhat mitigated or lessened in its severity down there, but if you look at the drought monitor maps that the University of Nebraska puts together, the whole state right now is in some level of drought. So it was primarily affecting the southern half of the state early on, and now it's pretty much spread everywhere. So,
and that affects our late summer, fall growth too of our pastures.
Absolutely. So, you think about, we got, between 1 and 3 inches of rain pretty much across the entire state last week. And, I know that people got up and looked at the weather forecast this week and saw we're going to be in the 70s during the day. We're going to be close to 50 at night. That's about as ideal of fescue growing conditions as you can ask for. But the problem is that our growing season's done. We are 45 days from the shortest day of the year. We're not getting the growing degree days. We're not getting we're not getting enough sunlight, quite honestly. And so, effectively, our growing season is nearing its end. We might get a little bit of regrowth this time. Pastures might green up. People might think that, we're sort of catching our second wind, or our pastures are at least. And I hate to be the one popping the balloon, but, I don't think we can bank on any appreciable amount of forage growth occurring between now and, the next 30 days or so.
And that little bit of green that we did get, we probably should protect that and not graze it.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is one of the things I struggle with. Right now, we've got folks that have been feeding hay for 30, 45 days, and we made less hay than we normally do in the spring anyway. And so, I know there's folks that are counting bales right now that are, wondering where they're going to steal a few extra days of forage for their cows. And the temptation to turn cattle back out on pasture and to graze them down to zero is very tempting, but it's bad for the long-term productivity of the pasture because, we need those plants to green up, put some solar panels up, the leaves, then, basically do some photosynthesis, put some nutrients back in the roots, and quite honestly set ourselves up in a position where we have a good spring. Right now that moisture is contributing to a little bit of green up, but it's also helping those plants store those root carbohydrates and build those reserves for next year. Any moisture that we get from here on out, we're probably just going to be banking it in the soil. We're not necessarily going to be using it for immediate productivity.
Okay. So if I'm a cattle producer, what do I need to be doing right now then?
That's a really good question. I keep track of the Missouri Department of Agriculture. They put out a weekly market summary every week, and so it's got auction market prices from across the state. It's got also they have a hay directory. It's got a listing for it and a kind of a short write-up. This is the first week that I've read their little paragraph, and it sounded bearish. Before that, they had been using verbiage like, the supply is low, but the demand is light. So, it was kind of in balance, supply and demand. This week was the first week that I've seen them come out and say, hey, demand's starting to pick up. People are starting to realize. And so I think now is the time for producers to be making some actions. I'm concerned that a lot of folks are going to wake up sometime after the first of the year and realize that they may be down to 30 days of hay, 3 weeks of hay. They may be, getting into the short rows. And at that point, we're not bringing any new hay onto the market in the middle of winter. We're just increasing demand for the supply that's already there. And so people that make decisions and actions now are probably going to be 45 days ahead of everybody else. And so, you've really kind of got two options. You either feed less or you need less. And by that, I mean, you figure out how to more efficiently utilize what you're currently feeding, or quite honestly, you figure out how to feed less by, marketing some cattle. Oh. Now, unfortunately, the piece that goes along with culling cattle and marketing them right now is that we're also starting to see, if you look at the sale barn reports, a month ago, a cow-calf pair was $2,000, and that price has come back down substantially since then. And so, you never want to tell people to sell cows now and buy them back later in a scenario where you're selling low and you're buying high. I mean, that's about as poor economics as you can have. But, this year's just so much different than the 2018 drought that we had. 2018, we had a dry fall of 17. People started feeding hay early. We didn't have much of any growth in 18, and so we woke up the 1st of June 2018, and we were, barns were empty. We were out of hay. We were in a really tight spot then, but grain prices were completely different at that time. A bushel of corn was half of what it is now. And so, I balanced a lot of rations in 2018 with as little hay as we could possibly get in these cows and a lot of grain, a lot of corn, a lot of soy hulls, a lot of gluten, a lot of commodity mixes, things along those lines. The mix that I was giving folks back then was 10 pounds of hay, 10 pounds of soy hulls. It was funny, back at that time, you could buy a ton of soy hulls for $120, $130 a ton delivered on the farm, and people were giving $95 to $100, $105 a bale, 1,000-pound bale. So you could literally buy a ton, 2,000 pounds of soy hulls for $50 a ton cheaper than you could hay, and the soy hulls have 40% more energy in them. So it was that math was easy. This year, you look at, like I said, corn is, near to $7 a bushel, and then if you've got basis against you, like, the southwest part of the state, you might be paying, 30, 40, 50 cent basis on top of that. So, it wouldn't surprise me for folks that are listening, to say, I'm not getting $7 corn. It's $8 corn where I'm at, And unfortunately, corn is king in the commodity markets. Everything else is priced based on corn. So, distillers grains is over $300 a ton right now. It's, that's $15 a hundredweight, $16 a hundredweight. Soybean hulls, wheat middlings, a lot of these other, corn gluten pellets, they're all similarly priced. I'm not seeing any real good deals in the market from replacing forage with grain, at least.
Sure. And in 2018, you all cautioned do not sell your herd because it was more of a localized drought. a localized issue. This is much more national or regional now. The Midwest.
Yeah, so the drought monitor map, they don't just do it individual states. That the first map you click on when you go to the University of Nebraska Drought Monitor website, which you can find by Googling, is nationwide. And it's kind of gloomy to see 2/3, 3/4 of the country covered in some level of drought. And these conditions have been pervasive out west for some time now. And so we're definitely in a more widespread area of drought. And so that creates a couple of different scenarios that are tough on us. Is one, we can't just ship cattle out to other places where we got lots of moisture. There's not demand for those cattle elsewhere. Secondly, if they're dry as well, they're keeping their hay at home, and so there was a lot of folks that bought hay and trucked it long distances in 2018, and so we were able to kind of work our way through that. This year, I'll say this, and it probably sounds a little controversial, but I think 2022 we're in worse shape right now than we were in 18, in the height of the drought in 18. I don't think people realize it though. That's why I feel so passionate about coming on and having this conversation today, is because we got to kind of get ahead of everybody else. I think the winter months are going to be tough for us. I think we're going to stay pretty busy in MU Extension.
So really, this is going to be, producers are going to have to make some very tough decisions on culling their herd. But this might also be a silver lining when they can really get more efficient. You'll get that genetics that's not working for them.
Well, and so, during times like this, I always tell folks, if a cow is not either pregnant or nursing, she doesn't need to be on the farm. There's just no reason to keep unproductive females around right now, especially mature females. To me, the replacement heifer is a little different because she's at least growing, right? And so if she's putting weight on, at least that's pounds of beef that you can sell later on, in the marketplace. And that heifer, if she doesn't make it as a replacement female, she can be marketed and go into a feed yard, and she can go into our beef supply easily. But those mature cows, we don't want to go. When we're only getting cull cow prices for them, we don't want to keep them around and feed them any longer than we absolutely have to, because you're looking at right now, if you're spending, gosh, there are people who are spending close to $3 a cow a day in feed, and that's just catastrophic compared to what baseline is. So, you talk about cow-calf production being a low-margin business in the first place. You get $3 a cow a day feed costs, and that tips it over.
So, on the other hand, if you're a livestock producer and you've got lots of hay, you fertilized, because there were parts of the area that did good.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a good time to expand?
So that's the glass half full question, Tim, and I love that perspective because, right, somebody's got to be the optimist. If your feed resources are there, absolutely, right? I think I would just wait a little while longer and let the market. I think the market, in terms of price for animals, is only going to be trending downward here, at least in the short run. And so, absolutely, this is an opportunity to perhaps buy low, and if you think about it from a macroeconomic perspective, our nation's cow herd inventory is as low as it's been in 60 years. As a nation, we have fewer beef cows today than we did 50 years ago. Yet we produce more beef, which is efficiency and sustainability and a topic outside of the scope of this conversation. But, there are a lot of people that I think are really feeling it this fall because there was a lot of conversation at meetings in the winter, spring, and even into the summer months. Hey, calf prices are going to be strong this fall. I'm going to keep a lot of heifers. Our cow herd's been declining. This is a great opportunity to retain more females, to expand our herds, and then we're seeing strong feeder calf prices still. And so that has come, but the opportunity for folks to expand is going to be constrained by their feed resource availability.
So there are some opportunities during this time, but it's going to take some management and some patience.
Absolutely, yeah. I think if you're expanding or you've got the desire to expand, I think some patience, will pay off well. I wouldn't be rushing into the market right now to buy. And in fact, that's why we're seeing prices soften at these auction markets for replacement females, for bred heifers, for cow-calf pairs, for pregnant mature cows. I mean, those prices are definitely softening. So if you're patient there, I think you're going to be rewarded. Now, on the other hand, if you're selling them, you probably need to get them gone before the market softens more,
Right. It just depends. You got to look at your inventory and see what you got.
Absolutely. And, it would be, the northern half of the state has just entered drought here in the last 3 months. It's the southern half that's gotten a little better, but it's still dry. It'd be a stretch for me to see somebody that would be in really good feed shape right now. I know even the farm I had rented in Randolph County, we ran about 60 less stockers on it this spring just because we were dry early on. And quite honestly, it was kind of an interesting scenario because the grass greened up, but it didn't grow. We were cool in March and February, or March and early part of April. So it actually affected our turnout date and the number of head we put out.
So we got this scenario, much different than 2018. Corn and grains aren't cheap anymore. But also energy costs as far as trucking's not cheap. So what are our options that if I can't liquidate my herd to the point I gotta purchase? What do I need to do?
So first, I'm going to challenge the mental model of I can't sell. Like there's never a reason to operate cattle at a loss. I mean, that comes down to this term that my friend and colleague Wesley Tucker likes to use, egonomics, right? And so that's bringing your ego into your business. I mean, you think about 100 cow herd, you're talking about somewhere between $125,000 and $150,000 in inventory right there, just in cattle, not counting any of your equipment. I mean, it's a business, and it is a business that is not a small amount of capital. This is not my daughter's lemonade stand on the corner. That it's not a low input, cheap business to get into. And so, when you're putting that much capital at risk, I think you got to make bottom line decisions. And so, I mean, I would challenge anybody straight up. Why can't you sell? I mean, there is, and that sort of thinking is pervasive in our cow-calf production. Unfortunately, there's a lot of folks that, would much rather feed through drought. There's a lot of folks that make a lot of investments in hay equipment and overhead, in assets that depreciate, things that rust. I mean, I heard an old saying a long time ago, and I think it came from Kit Farrow. The more steel that you put between a sun and a cow's mouth, the less profitable you're going to be. And I've really internalized that and made that one of my core philosophies. And what he's saying by that is, if you think about it in terms of feed offered to a cow, when you turn a cow out to graze, it's going to cost you 50 to 60% less than if you harvest the forage, you store the forage, you feed the forage back to the cow, and she wastes some of it. The idea of storing forage and feeding hay, I expend a lot of effort in my position to point out to folks that it is a very capital intensive endeavor, and quite honestly that it's not in the best interest of cow-calf operations from a long-term financial profit. It doesn't make sense. And so, that's with $25 a bale hay and abundant supply, because, if you think about Missouri, the reason that the hay industrial complex has really taken a hold here in the state is that, the way tall fescue grows, we have more grass than we know what to do with from about the 1st of April to the 1st of June, right? With our normal cow-calf operations, because our forage demand for our cow herd is relatively static or uniform over the course of the year. Sure, it'll ebb and flow depending on whether they're pregnant or nursing a calf. But cows got to eat 365 days a year, and our pastures don't grow 365 days a year. So we take those periods of excessive growth and we store them for the summer slump, the winter now that we're going into. But there's a cost to doing all of that, and when you have all your eggs in one basket, and by that I mean in a cool season perennial pasture, a functional group monoculture, then you have to store acorns away for the winter. From a cost standpoint, though, I mean, cow-calf production's a low-margin business in the first place, and then you add the need for a lot of depreciating assets, and that's a large driver of why we don't have kids coming back to the farm. I mean, it takes so much money to get in it, and it quite honestly, for most folks, if you talk to anybody in this state who is building a cow herd right now, they're subsidizing their cow-calf operation with off-farm income. I guarantee it. Anybody who's trying to, start small and build, they're admittedly accepting negative cash flow from this business, and their play is that they're trying to grow equity over time, and equity's not going to pay the bills. Equity's not going to bring the kids back to the farm. Equity's not going to pay to raise a family. And so, I at times I get the perception that people think of me as sort of anti-cow calf, but in reality, I'm trying to get in the business myself, quite honestly. I grew up on that ranch in New Mexico, but that ranch was owned by somebody else. It was a blessing to get to grow up on a ranch that was 1.2 million acres. It was the largest ranch in the state of New Mexico. My dad managed about 75,000 acres. The place that he took care of, I mean, that was amazing, but it was all ultimately somebody else's. I want to be an owner. I don't want to be an operator. So,
well, Eric, I think we've got a future podcast talk on forage-based livestock systems.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot to talk about there. There sure is.
Let's get down to the solutions now. What can farmers do now?
So if you've made the decision to feed, you're always looking for the undervalued commodity in the market. And I think that the undervalued commodity in the market right now is actually high-quality forage, as crazy as it is to say. I certainly wouldn't want to be out there giving $80 a bale for fescue hay. I wouldn't want to be given $50 a bale for CRP hay that's even lower quality than fescue hay. If you think about what our challenge is right now, it's not that there is a nutrient imbalance in the forage, whether it's a mineral or a vitamin or protein. We're faced with an energy crunch. We don't have enough calories that we're trying to get into these cattle. And so what I'm doing with folks when they call and they bring up a scenario, we're talking through the culling, we're talking through all those things. But, when it comes down to the nut cutting in terms of feeding, what we try to do is identify what the cheapest feed is, not on a per bale or per ton basis, on a per pound of total digestible nutrients, or in other words, per calorie basis. We're trying to find the cheapest thing available. I mean, if you look at the MDA's weekly market summary, good quality alfalfa hay is going for $150 a ton. Okay. So that's alfalfa hay that the dairies don't want. It's not supreme. It's not premium. It's kind of middle to lower end. It might have some grass mixed in it. But shoot, $80 for a 1,000-pound bale of grass hay, that's $160 a ton. So, and I know that poor lower end alfalfa is still going to be 57, 58 percent TDN, and fescue hay right now that people aren't selling their good hay off. They're keeping their good hay, right? The stuff that's on the market's the bad hay. It's 50 TDN. I mean, we're talking about, 20-ish% more calories for the same money. Now, the pushback to that, as you can imagine, is alfalfa is not our primary forage crop in this state. So if you're going to be hauling alfalfa in, you're probably going to be buying it from long distances. And then that brings into account the $5 plus a loaded mile right now with fuel prices. And so, the distance that it gets trucked is going to be a significant piece of whether that's going to make sense or not. If you can find high quality hay local, that's the hole in the market right now. And it's not a big hole. It's not like buying a ton of soy hulls for less than a ton of grass hay in 2018, but it's at least what I would call the least worst option.
Well, could I buy some of this low quality hay and ammoniate it?
So that's a good question. So the ammoniation process is covering it up and applying anhydrous ammonia. So you're going to increase the crude protein content of it. You're going to increase the amount of hay that a cow will voluntarily consume. It can help, but it's not going to be. I'm not gonna turn fescue hay into alfalfa doing it. That's probably somewhere in the middle. I mean it's helpful, but quite honestly, we've got ammonia prices. We got fertilizer prices that are so high right now that I think you'd have to I haven't put a pencil to ammoniation. I'm really glad you brought that up. I'm actually surprised I haven't heard of more people that have been asking questions about it. But I think a lot of the reason that they haven't been asking is just because fertilizer's been so high that it scared people off. We definitely got a lot of interest in ammoniating hay back in 18 for sure.
Especially that CRP haze and other low quality.
Absolutely.
Haze.
Well, I mean, I've had as extreme of an example as somebody called me last week, and they were able to buy rice hulls for $12 a ton, and that was how they were going to feed their cows, but they'd never fed rice hulls before, and so they called wanting some information. Well, a rice hull is 3% crude protein and about 30% TDN. I mean, I'd be better off going to Walmart and getting the cardboard boxes from the back to feed my cows. I mean, honestly, it's just, a brood cow, if she's never going to perform or maintain body weight on a hay that's less than 50 TDN, like it's just not going to happen. And the further we get south from 50 TDN, the worse off we're going to be. Because essentially what happens in that case when we get these low quality forages, the rate at which they're digested in the gut slows, and the longer they stay in the gut, the less feed they're going to eat the next day. So, today's feed carries over and has an impact on how much feed they consume tomorrow in those cases when it's so slowly digested. And so, I've seen studies where they fed really, really low quality hay to cows, and, they ate good for a few days to start on. They got their gut full, and then their voluntary intake of hay, they had as much hay as they wanted in front of them, crashed. Like 8 pounds a cow a day. Think about it. 1,200-pound mature cow eating 8 pounds of hay a day, she's going to lose weight real fast.
So if you have a lot of low quality, but some better quality, high quality, would you ration out the high quality to help meet her needs?
So that's one way of doing it. The other way I think about it, and this is just my general philosophy, I try to feed my highest quality hay to my growing animals. So if I got bred heifers right now, a bred heifer is only going to calve she's going to be about 85% of her mature body weight. She's going to need to grow while she's nursing that first calf. We know from lots of research in this that a first calf heifer's breed back rate, her conception rate the following year is usually about 10 percentage units less than either the replacement heifers or the mature cows. And so that's a really vulnerable age. And especially when you think about the investments that you've made into a replacement heifer, into a bred heifer, into a first calf heifer. I mean, we put a lot of capital into those animals, whether we're raising them at home ourselves, whether we're buying them out of a sale. Shout out to the Show Me Select Heifer Development Program and all of the really nice heifers that get sold at 6-8 different sales across the state every fall and spring. I mean, that's a great, wonderful program. It's done a lot of good for the state. But when you make that investment in a high quality premium female, she needs to be around for a few years to pay herself off, to pay you back. I would be thinking more along the lines in terms of hay quality. If I've got a range of hay quality, my good hay is going to go to my young growing females, and my poor hay is going to go to my mature cows that aren't growing anymore. But to your point, though, going back to it, if I didn't have any young females around and I was just trying to figure out, I absolutely would be feeding a couple bales of the bad stuff, one bale of the good stuff, trying to mix it in, and unfortunately, I think we're going to be backed into a corner where we're going to have to do some supplementing this winter, especially as we get to feeding some of these really low quality forages that are surely to come on the market.
Keep their belly full, but also get them the nutrition that they need.
Yeah, and that's the challenge that a lot of producers run into, is that there is a difference between feeding to appetite and feeding to nutrient requirements. And, oftentimes feeding to nutrient requirements requires quite a bit less feed than feeding to appetite. And so, anytime that the cows are standing at the fence bawling at you, the natural inclination is to feed them. But, there are very easy scenarios to sketch out where they might be acting hungry, but in terms of weight gain, they're gaining weight. It sounds like that's an oxymoron, but it's entirely possible to do it. And there's been a lot of studies. Folks have gotten interested in over the last 30 years, quite honestly, in trying to do some sort of confinement-based cow-calf production system. Part of the reason that they were interested in that was cheap grain. How do we replace expensive forage with cheap grain? And so they put these rations together to feed cows in confinement, and they said, well, our formulator says that these cows only need, 10, 12 pounds of feed a day to meet their nutrient requirements. They clean it up in 20 minutes, and then they're walking the fence lines and bawling at you. And, that's the difference between feeding to nutrient requirements and feeding to appetite.
Well, it's just like us, when we raid the refrigerator at 9 o'clock at night, it's not because we need it, we just want it.
Guilty.
And they're the same way. They're the same way. Now, I grew up more where we background cattle. What if you're doing that? What if they don't have a cow-calf operation, but you've got the backgrounders?
So that's my specialty, actually. That's where I really enjoy, and I do a lot of work in these days. Typically when we background cattle, we want cost of gains to be 2/3 of what they are in a feedlot. And so cost of gain is how much it costs us, not just in feed, but also all the inputs: medicine, vaccines, labor, time, yardage is the term we use as a catch-all. We want that cost per pound of weight gain to be about 2/3 of what it was in the feedlot. Last year, every pound of weight that was put on a calf to go into the feedlot cost about $1.10 a pound. This year, it's $1.40. And so, backgrounders last year were in a spot where, you were getting 60 to 70 cents was the cost of gain for backgrounders. That's 90 now. It's if you're doing 80, you're doing great. If you're doing 90, that's about par. It was funny, not that long ago, and I'm talking just 2-3 years ago. If you were if you were a nutritionist for a feedlot and they had a cost of gain that was above $1, you were going to get your butt chewed. Today, you're getting rewarded if you've got cost of gains that are below $1.20. It's the market has changed so dramatically, and essentially corn has doubled in price in the last few years. So it's not surprising that the margins have gotten really tight there. And so then the question becomes for backgrounders, and in particular people who are on the smaller scale, how do you keep those cost of gains manageable? Because if you're going to buy a 400-pound calf and make a 600-pound calf at them, the value of the weight that you put on the 200 pounds that you're going to put on those two animals is not the same as, a 6 weight is selling for $1.70 right now. Every pound of weight that you put on them is not worth $1.70. You have to factor in what the difference between your purchase price of that animal was, the total value of that animal when you sell them, divide the difference between the two of that by the amount of weight you put on, and that's value of gain. It's pretty uncommon for value of gains to be much above $1. And so typically what I tell people is that if you can put weight on animals for less than $1, it's probably going to make some sense. If it's costing you over $1 to do it, it's probably not going to make sense. And I know the difference between that the price per pound at sale and the true value of gain on a price per pound basis. I know that concept is probably not best explained in a podcast, without paper and pencil to show a good example of it. But I can tell you that if your cost of gains are over $1, you're probably in a tight spot. But unfortunately right now, I mean, with the price of feeds, I mean, you're probably getting there. And again, going back to our cow-calf comment about solutions, the most undervalued feed is probably cover crops and high-quality forages, right? And so high-quality forages this time of year is probably not stockpiled fescue from the perspective that that's going towards cows. That needs to be used elsewhere. But, if you're an integrated row crop and livestock producer and you've got cover crops out on your fields, that's probably your most undervalued feed stuff right now.
But I was just talking to some farmers yesterday, and they were saying they still have 300 acres to plant. So that's not going to do us any good.
Well, and that's a tough one because we're running out of days to get that stuff planted. The Center for Regenerative Agriculture here at MU, they've got a newsletter that comes out once a week. And last week's newsletter, they presented a infographic with planting dates by various cover crops. And, I think cereal rye is the only one that they recommended planting into November. I think most of them, there was a September, October kind of a deal. So we're running out of time if they're not already in the ground, and then you couple that with the drought,
So for future, you may think, okay, I'm going to have this issue probably in the wintertime I need to have grazing. I could manage my row crops where I have wheat or cereal rye or something planted in September, early October. So I would have it in January and February.
Well, and that's what's interesting about this year is that if you look at from a grain farmer's perspective, I got a lot of calls in July and into August of people that were planning on corn silage to feed their backgrounders this year, and the corn silage didn't make an ear at all. And so then, hey, come silage time, what is this stuff? How good or bad is it? Can I feed it? What do I need to do to make the adjustment? If you were planning on using corn silage to background calves on, there's a lot of people that were disappointed there. That type of a system where you're getting the crop out early and you have time to go back in and plant a cover crop, that provides an opportunity to make some higher quality feed, and put yourself in a position to have something to feed those cattle.
Now, you mentioned a few years ago when you were discussing this that corn stalks, grazing your cornfields, if you have the water available, is an option.
Yeah, so I would say that the University of Nebraska has long been the leader in getting their producers to adopt this practice and to utilize those corn residues. You think about it, when you turn cattle out onto a harvested cornfield, it's not just stalk that's out there. I mean, there's leaf, there's husk, there's certainly some cobs, there's some dropped grain as well. Now, granted, modern combines, we're leaving a lot less grain in the field than what happened 20, 30 years ago. But, I mean, there are all these different plant parts that are available that are otherwise not going to be utilized. And so, corn stalks are a great feed, especially to turn cows out and get 30 to 60 days of grazing. I mean, the old rule of thumb used to be that it was about an acre a cow a month. So, if you could provide, 2 acres, you should be able to get a cow 30 days of corn stalk grazing with no supplement, and then the following 30 days you probably need to get some supplement, in particular protein, just to help them utilize the lower end of that feed.
And if that has wheat or a cover crop planted into it, that just that much better.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's if there's a cover crop planted into it, then the cow gets to mix her own diet basically. She can eat some of that high quality forage that's being grown from the cover crop. She can graze on some of the stalks that are left behind. You know, the that's an area that quite honestly we probably need to explore a little bit more with research to kind of help dial that system in for folks, because I'm not aware of, you know, good recommendations that I can give off the cuff right now in terms of how I might utilize a system like that. You know, most of the work that's been done has been basically a otherwise idle field that had been harvested for corn.
So maybe some of your neighbors that have cornfields, and if water is available, now how far do you recommend that they have that the cows can walk to the water?
Yeah, so, you know, the old rule of thumb was that cattle will walk up to a mile for water without any impact on performance.
Okay.
Um, but in reality, if you look at there's some data that would suggest that you probably don't want them to be walking more than a quarter of a mile to a third of a mile, at least in our type of system. Now, at home, it was not uncommon for folks to have cows that would walk over a mile to get water.
Okay.
But desert New Mexico, I mean, they're accustomed to it. You know, animals in this type of an environment who aren't accustomed to doing something like that may be reluctant to at first. And so, you know, I think our bigger challenge is that so much more of our production is dry land based, our crop production.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, there may not be a well on the 80 to provide water there. And so then you start to ask yourself the question of hauling water, and am I set up to haul water to those cows? And, you know, if you think about it, you know, a mature cow this time of year, she's probably going to be drinking about a gallon of water each day per 100 pounds of body weight. So, you know, if you planned for somewhere between 12 and 15 gallons of water per cow per day, you can kind of do the math on it, but it sure don't take very many cows for that to become a full-time job, hauling water, right? Because, I mean, you think about a 1,000-gallon water wagon will, I mean, that's enough water for what, 65 cows for a day, maybe?
It's a lot of hauling. And ponds, do we depend on the pond in the winter?
If you could fence it in such a way they could get there off of the field easily, maybe, but, you know, having a pond in the middle of a crop field is
or the edge, or
even the edge for that matter, it's not ideal, you know.
Sure.
So yeah, it's unfortunate that, you know, we've torn a lot of fences out in an effort to crop all the way to the road, to the property line, whatever, you know. So we've lost a lot of that infrastructure, but, you know, I would say, like I said, the biggest challenge comes from water infrastructure.
Yes.
Then you also have the mindset, or the idea, the notion that, you know, putting cattle out on your crop fields is going to lead to compaction the following spring and hurt next year's crop, you know that. And certainly if they were out there in the March mud, I think that's an issue. But if you look at it, I mean, our driest months of the year in Missouri are November, December, and January. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, if they're out there and it's dry, I mean, I would assume that compaction is much less of an issue than if we were, you know, wet.
We always had ours pulled off by the end of February.
Yeah.
That was kind of the rule of thumb. You know, that way we could avoid some of that. Well, let's finish up by this spring. I get through this winter. What can I do this spring, anticipating I have no hay left? I need to do something.
That's a really good question. And unfortunately, you know, I think a lot of that's going to depend on we desperately need a good, moist, and warm spring. I mean, if we're cold and wet going into April, we don't get the forage growth, you know, we're late turning cattle out, that's just going to stretch it all that much tighter. You know, in an ideal world, you know, we'd have a mild winter, we'd have early spring green up, we'd catch good moisture, and we'd be able to turn those cattle out early so that we at least lop some of the days of hay feeding off of the end of it. I mean, you know, the other piece of it as well is, you know, the folks that have grazed their pastures into the ground this fall, you know, I always caution against that, one, because cows are going to be losing body condition when you graze pastures that hard before you intervene with hay or supplement or something along those lines. But the second part of that is that, you can slow the grass regrowth in the spring down. So, I at this point, we're probably just hoping, and I would tell you that right now we're, early November. So we've got all of November, December, January, February, March. If we don't have if we don't have 6 months of hay on the farm right now, we're probably in a tight spot, because my rule of thumb is that it's about 1,000-pound bale per cow per month. If you assume that a cow's going to eat, so in the animal unit equivalent system, the assumption is that a cow's going to eat somewhere in the neighborhood of 26 to 30 pounds of hay per head per day, which works out to be about 780 to 900 pounds of hay. And if you assume, 10 to 15% waste, that rule of thumb works out pretty nice. And so, now bale size obviously matters, because, a 4x5 that weighs 800 pounds is a lot different than a 5x6 that weighs 1,400 pounds. But if you don't have, 5,000 to 6,000 pounds of hay per cow on hand right now, you're probably in a pretty tight spot. I would tell folks to go count your bales and, see where you're at.
All right. So, so this spring, there's nothing that we can plant really to help us this spring.
I have some interest in trying to explore that in the future, but I don't have an answer today, that we could, purely speculating and blowing rainbows and sunshine out there, we would be able to, interseed cover crops into higher quality fescue pastures that we've grazed down hard, knowing that, it's going to take them some time to recover in the spring. We could come in with an annual at that point, but I'm way outside of my wheelhouse there at that point. You got to get a real agronomist on.
But that's something that we can think about next year, is if you have a pasture that's been grazed down, plant some cover crops in it in late summer, early fall for winter grazing.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's for sure.
All right. Well, Eric, this has been fantastic. Any final words?
No, I thank you all for being here. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please call or email me if there's anything that you want to cuss and discuss about drought, cows, and feeding and all of those things. So,
is there a good number that they could call?
573-884-7873, or email me at baileyeric@missouri.edu.
Well, that concludes this month's Tim's Take. Thank you, Eric, for this fabulous discussion.
Thanks, Tim.
And join us next month when we have Allison Meyer here from Animal Science Division, and she'll be discussing how you feed the cow or the heifer in that last trimester can not only affect her calf, but also her in her next pregnancy. So join us next month.